My boyfriend Dan and I genuinely used to love taking long, almost impromptu road trips to places that we've never been. Typically in the spring and fall, around our birthday months, mine is April, his is October, we would randomly decide on where to go, load up the car, and just head out into the road. Of course, he would have to schedule the time off, and I would have to make sure my clients knew that I would be out for a few days, so they weren't 100% impromptu, but there was always some planning and scheduling, but we would pretty much randomly choose our destination the week of the trips. He and I have been together for close to 10 years now, and we did this every year from the 5th year we were together all the way to 2019. When we had the money and the time, we would just go. On this particular trip, back in early 2019, that this whole glitch happened, we had actually planned to take a long drive from our home in Madison Heights, Michigan, all the way out to a place called Bryce Canyon National Park in southern Utah. This trip was a particularly long one. It's about a 28-hour drive, so we had planned on taking a little more than a week off, and we were going to stop around the halfway mark, somewhere between the southwestern tip of Nebraska and the top corner of Colorado. If you've ever driven that little section of the country, there really isn't much there between North Platte and Sterling, but it's still beautiful, at least to me. I remember this whole plan because I recall how much we had planned on this specific trip. It was a bit out of character for us to do so much plotting along the way, but we felt it was necessary due to the length of the drive. And while some people may say that we could have just gone straight through if one of us slept and one of us drove, the problem with that is that I actually don't have a license due to a medical issue that I'm not going to get into here. But he obviously knew this and he was totally fine with driving and stopping midway, plus it gave us more time to take it all in, which is the point of road trips anyways. The plan as stated was to leave our home at 5 in the morning, drive all the way out to the tiny tourist town of Ogallala, Nebraska, and spend the night there. This would be about 16 hours, and then the remainder of the trip from Ogallala to Bryce Canyon in the morning, which was only about 11 hours. Splitting it with the majority in the first half meant that we could go a bit slower on the trip through literally all of Colorado if necessary, and we would get there at a good time to check into a hotel. We followed this plan as we had basically written it. We left home on time, got out to Ogallala, stayed there overnight, and then planned to head out in the morning. While day 1 was perfect, it was day 2 where things kinda went awry. We both woke up in a slight bit of a panic because when we opened our eyes, we noticed it was already sunny out. Our plan was to head out around 5 in the morning and get there at 5 or 6 in the evening. But when we checked the clock, it was already 8:30. For some reason, Dan's phone didn't charge and had died overnight, which caused our main alarm to not go off. And while this isn't necessarily the glitch, we checked the charger in the outlet, he unplugged the phone and plugged it back in, and it started charging. Definitely weird, but not what this story is about. Because we woke up late, we decided to go ahead and just get breakfast since our plan was already messed up. We stopped at a local diner, had our food, enjoyed the late morning, and headed out onto the highway at around 10:30 or so. This meant if we drove directly, we would get to our hotel destination at 10, the earliest, so it wasn't too bad, but it was still off schedule, which definitely upset Dan. I told him it was fine and that losing a few hours was acceptable since we planned to take it slow today anyways. After a bit, we were on the road and at a steady pace, so things got as close to back on track as they could. After about 3 hours on the highway, heading straight for our destination, Google Maps made a comment about there being heavy traffic ahead or something about an accident, I can't remember, and it recommended an alternate route that would add about 20 minutes to our time. Again, Dan was upset, but we relented and took the route that it said we should. Adding this extra half hour meant that we would get there at around 11, and we should be entering Utah around 6 or so. This is where the glitch happens. By this time, we had been on the road for 3.5 hours, and we got on the road at 10:30 a.m. This means that it was only around 2 in the afternoon. Only a few minutes after we get back into the route, Google Maps chimes in again and does its little "Welcome to Utah." When it said this, I chuckled and said, "See, we're making good time," which was apparently the wrong thing to say, because my boyfriend pulled the car over and just stared at the phone blankly. I asked him what was going on because it kind of freaked me out. He just slowly looks over at me, then back to the phone, then back at me with a look of pure shock. At first, for me, it didn't click, but he quickly explained why he was so confused. There was absolutely no way for us to already be hitting Utah. It is around 7 hours to get from Ogallala to Utah border on 70 West, which is the highway we had been taking. We left at 10:30 because we woke up late. We added half an hour because of the accident, which meant it was going to be 7.5 hours after when we left at the minimum, which was going to be somewhere in the realm of 6 p.m. or later. The time it said that we had entered Utah and the time on the clock was 2:18. Based on this time, we would have had to have been going at a ridiculous speed to get there at that time, which we weren't. He was adamant that it was impossible, but he reloaded maps on his phone, made me load it up on my phone, and then he checked the clock on everything we owned. They all synced up. We were 4.5 hours away from Bryce Canyon. It was 2:18 p.m. Somehow, without any logical explanation, we had managed to get ourselves pretty much back on the original schedule, despite waking up late and the delay on the road. I didn't have an explanation, but I was happy to chalk it up to some kind of miracle. He was not. He was in a weird state of panic, but after a while, we got back on the road and pressed on. We got to the hotel at around 6, checked in, and he went straight to sleep for the night, which was a bummer, but I could tell this whole thing had messed with his head. Thankfully, it didn't affect him enough to ruin our trip or anything, but it was enough for that to be our last road trip for a while. Obviously, we've missed out on a few because of COVID, but we didn't go anywhere at the end of 2019 or pretty much of 2020, mostly because of him. As much as he won't admit it, I feel like this whole thing has actually given him a weird fear of driving long distances, which is not something he had prior. I'm hopeful that I'll be able to get him to go on a trip this year, but I'm not holding my breath. That's my glitch, and it's one that I still do not have an answer for to this day.